My mother tore my engagement ring off my swollen finger and shouted, "You threw away everything I taught you." For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I stared at my hand. My finger was red, swollen, and throbbing where the ring had been. The ring itself lay on the carpet between us. My mother picked it up. She held it tightly in her fist, as though it belonged to her. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," she said. I looked at her. "No, Mom." My voice shook, but I didn't look away. "I think I'm finally making my own decision." Her face hardened. That sentence seemed to hurt her more than anything else I could have said. My name is Claire Morgan, and for 29 years, I had been the daughter who followed instructions. I went to the college my mother chose. I studied the subject she approved of. I accepted the jobs she thought were respectable. I dressed the way she liked. I dated men she considered suitable. And every time I made a decision, I asked myself the same question. Will Mom approve? I didn't realize how much of my life belonged to her until Ethan came along. Ethan was different. He never told me what to do. He never tried to impress my parents. He didn't care whether the restaurant had 5 stars or whether my clothes came from an expensive store. He cared about whether I was happy. We met at a small bookstore during a storm. I had been trying to reach for a book on the top shelf when another hand reached for it at the same time. "Sorry," he said. "No, you take it." He smiled. "You wanted it first. You can have it." He looked at me. "Then we'll split the difference." He opened the book. "We can read it together." I laughed. That was how it started. 3 years later, Ethan proposed. There was no expensive restaurant, no photographer, no orchestra. He took me to the park where we had our first real conversation. He was nervous. I could see his hands shaking. Then he said, "Claire, I don't know what the future will look like." He took a small box from his pocket. "But I know I want to face it with you." I cried. The ring wasn't enormous. It wasn't covered in diamonds. But it was beautiful. Inside the band were 4 tiny engraved words. "Always beside you." I said yes. Then I made the mistake of telling my mother. She stared at the ring for nearly 10 seconds. Then she asked, "How much did he spend?" I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. "Mom, how much?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "I didn't ask." She sighed. "That tells me everything." "What does it tell you?" "That you're thinking emotionally." I looked at the ring. "I love it." "You should be thinking about your future." "This is my future." She shook her head. "Claire, love doesn't pay bills." "I know." "Love doesn't protect you." "I know." "Love doesn't guarantee security." I looked at her. "Neither does money." She didn't answer. From that day forward, she criticized everything about Ethan. His job, his apartment, his car, his family, his clothes, even the way he spoke. "He's too quiet." Then, "He talks too much." "He isn't ambitious." Then, "He's trying too hard." "He doesn't have enough money." Then, "Men like him always want something." I eventually asked her, "What exactly do you want from him?" She answered immediately, "I want you to marry someone who can give you the life you deserve." "What life?" She smiled. "The life I gave you." I looked around her enormous house. The marble floors, the expensive furniture, the paintings, the perfect garden. "You mean your life?" "Yes. But I don't want your life." She stared at me. "Everyone wants my life." "I don't." That was the beginning of the real war. My mother began planning my wedding without asking me. She booked a luxury venue. She chose a designer dress. She created a guest list. She even hired a wedding planner. I canceled everything. She was furious. "You're embarrassing me." "I'm getting married, Mom." "Exactly." She looked at me as though I had committed a crime. "This is supposed to be the most important day of your life." "It is." "Then why are you treating it like it's nothing?" "Because I don't need 1,000 people watching me marry the man I love." She shook her head. "You'll regret this." I smiled sadly. "I might regret many things." Then I looked at her. "But I don't think I'll regret choosing Ethan." A week later, my mother invited us to dinner. I thought maybe she had finally accepted the engagement. Instead, she placed a thick folder on the table. "What is this?" "A financial agreement." I opened it. The first page listed Ethan's assets. The second listed mine. The third contained conditions. My mother had included rules about where we would live, how money would be managed, how property would be divided, even what would happen if Ethan and I divorced. I looked at her. "You want us to sign this?" "Of course." "This isn't a prenup. It's protection." "Protection for whom?" She didn't answer. Ethan remained calm. "Mrs. Morgan, I understand you want Claire protected." She snapped. "I wasn't speaking to you." Ethan stopped. I looked at my mother. Mom, this isn't happening. She stared at me. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. No, you don't. I trust Ethan. She laughed. Trust? Yes. You're throwing away everything I taught you. I felt tears building in my eyes. You taught me to work hard. Yes. You taught me to be independent. Yes. You taught me never to let anyone control me. She became silent. I continued. Then why are you angry because I'm doing exactly that? Her expression changed. For a moment, I thought she might understand. Instead, she stood. You'll regret choosing him. I shook my head. I'll regret it more if I don't choose myself. She walked out. I thought the argument was over. I was wrong. 3 days later, I returned to my parents' house to collect some childhood belongings. My mother was waiting in the hallway. Her eyes immediately went to my hand. You're still wearing it? Yes. You're really going to marry him? Yes. She stepped closer. Take it off. I stared at her. No. Claire. No. Her voice became sharp. I said take it off. I said no. Then she grabbed my hand. Mom. She pulled the ring. Pain shot through my finger. Stop. But she pulled harder. The ring was stuck because my finger was swollen. I cried out. Mom, you're hurting me. She finally tore it free. The ring fell onto the floor. She picked it up. You're throwing your life away. I looked at my trembling hand. Then at her. No. I bent down and picked up the ring. You're throwing away your relationship with your daughter. She froze. I walked toward the door. Behind me, she shouted. After everything I taught you. I turned around. You taught me how to survive. I held up the ring. But Ethan taught me what it feels like to be loved without conditions. Then I walked out. That night, Ethan saw my swollen finger. He immediately reached for my hand. What happened? I told him. His expression became furious. But he didn't insult my mother. He simply asked, Do you want me to come with you? I shook my head. No. Are you sure? I nodded. I need to do this myself. He squeezed my hand gently. Then I'll be beside you. I looked at him. Those 4 words suddenly meant more than the engraving inside the ring. Always beside you. The next morning, I made a decision. I canceled the wedding my mother had planned. I didn't cancel my marriage to Ethan. I canceled the version of my life that someone else had designed. We would get married our way. No luxury ballroom. No massive guest list. No family demands. Just the people who genuinely loved us. But before we could reach that day, a letter arrived from my grandmother. And inside that letter was a secret that would finally explain why my mother had been so desperate to control my marriage, and why she had been terrified of Ethan from the very beginning. 2 weeks later, Ethan and I stood in a small garden behind a historic chapel. There were only 14 people there. My brother, my closest friends, Ethan's parents, a few people who had supported us from the beginning. My mother wasn't there. My father wasn't there either. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking toward the entrance wondering whether my mother approved. I was looking at Ethan, and he was smiling at me. You okay? He whispered. I nodded. For the first time in a long time. He took my hand carefully. My finger had finally healed. The engagement ring sat where it belonged. The tiny engraving inside still read, Always beside you. The ceremony was simple. No enormous floral arrangements. No expensive orchestra. No designer decorations. Just sunlight, flowers, and people who were genuinely happy for us. When it was time for the vows, Ethan looked into my eyes. I can't promise you a perfect life, he said. I don't want one. He smiled. I can't promise we'll never struggle. I know. But I promise that when things get difficult, I'll never make you face them alone. My eyes filled with tears. Always beside you, I whispered. He smiled. Always. We were married that afternoon. For a few days, everything felt peaceful. Then the letter arrived. It was from my grandmother. She had been living in another state for several years and had always been the quietest member of our family. She rarely got involved in arguments. She never criticized my choices. And whenever I visited her, she would always say the same thing. Your life belongs to you, Claire. The letter was handwritten. I recognized her handwriting immediately. I opened it that night while Ethan was making tea. The first sentence made my heart stop. Claire, if you're reading this, then your mother has probably tried to convince you that you're making a terrible mistake. I stared at the page. Ethan noticed my expression. What is it? It's from Grandma. I kept reading. I have wanted to tell you something for years, but I was afraid of what your mother would do if she knew. My hands began to shake. I read the next paragraph. The engagement ring Ethan gave you may look simple, but it has a history. Your grandfather bought the diamond many years ago. It originally belonged to my mother. I looked at the ring. What? Ethan walked over. What does it say? I continued reading. When your grandfather died, I gave the stone to your mother because I believed she would someday give it to you. She refused. She said you should marry someone wealthy enough to buy you something better. I stopped. Ethan looked at me. Claire. I couldn't speak. I read the next line. Your mother eventually sold the original setting, but she kept the diamond. I don't know why she never told you. I stared at my ring. The stone suddenly looked different. Not more expensive. More meaningful. The next sentence was even more shocking. The diamond was never meant to represent wealth. It was meant to represent choice. I looked at Ethan. He sat beside me. Keep reading. I did. Your grandfather proposed to me when he was 23. He had almost no money. Everyone told me I was throwing my life away. But I chose him anyway. Tears filled my eyes. Your mother watched us build our life together. Somewhere along the way, she became convinced that financial security mattered more than love. She believed she was protecting you. But protection became control. I lowered the letter. Ethan gently touched my shoulder. Maybe she thinks she's helping. She hurt me. I know. She tore the ring off my finger. He looked down. I know. I took a breath. Then I noticed something else inside the envelope. A second sheet of paper. It was a legal document. I unfolded it. My eyes widened. What is that? Ethan leaned closer. It was a copy of an old trust agreement. My grandmother had established a trust for me years earlier. The amount was substantial. Very substantial. I looked at the date. It had been created when I turned 18. My mother had been named as the trustee. And there was a condition. The money would become fully accessible when I turned 30. I was 29. I stared at the document. Why didn't Mom ever tell me about this? Ethan looked at the final page. There was a handwritten note.